So we are back with another video, joined once again by the infamous Sean Waxman, and as Seb always likes to say, Sean motherfucking Waxman. Sean, since the last time we did this, we recorded a video on programming, planning, I guess you could say periodizing the training of a more advanced weightlifter. That's on the Weightlifting House Patreon. If you're not a Patreon member, you can go check it out. It's really cheap to sign up. You sign up for a month, see if you like it, see if you like the content, watch the video, and I think that will set you guys up to watch this video, which is how to develop beginner and intermediate weightlifters. So a bit of a different approach, definitely a few more different considerations. But before we dive into the meat and potatoes of it, Sean, maybe you can just give us an update on how things are going, how all of the side projects you've been working on are being developed, and kind of where you're at.
Yeah, I've been a little quiet, just since I moved to Utah, just doing I have an opportunity to kind of start with a clean slate. So everything's going great out here in Utah. Training a few athletes locally, and retuning my remote programming stuff. So I'm working with Traineroic on low cost group programming, and gonna launch a new website soon, and just, I mean, to be honest with you, when I first got out here, I didn't do shit for like 4 months, 5 months. I woke up every day, I trained, I looked at I took walks, I stared at birds. I just needed a break. But now I'm starting to work again. So I needed like 4 or 5 months off to just chill. But now I'm back at it, and really focusing on remote athletes, writing my book, and kind of quantifying, the remote. I think remote programming is really is definitely here to stay, especially not just the group stuff, but individual stuff, and really kind of taking a deep dive into what that is, because training, one-on-one with an athlete remotely is different than doing it in person. So what are the differences? And how do you so a lot of the questions I've been asking myself is, what are the differences between doing it in person and remote, and how do you optimize the remote relationship and still be able to get somebody to the highest levels? So trying to answer those questions, and I think I've kind of really done a good job with that. I think I'm on to something, so we'll see.
Yeah, I think everyone's excited for Waxman 2.0. And the cool thing about it is a lot of the programming that you do, a lot of the coaching that you do, like this is the system that's utilized. So I think people are getting a firsthand look into how you would develop an athlete. We did the more advanced weightlifter, how you develop advanced athletes, and now we're going to look into how you would develop like a beginner and intermediate level weightlifter. So I think a few of the things we focused on with the advanced athletes, it's the competition calendar that drives the structure of the training. You look at the weaknesses of the athletes, where they can improve. You kind of bias the training towards that stuff. Further away from the major competition, you would do more of it. As you would get closer to the comp, increase in specificity. That stuff changes a little bit with beginners, and I think there are a few considerations we should discuss. So maybe you can set up the framework that this conversation will take place within, and start off with a beginner weightlifter, someone who, and I guess it would depend on how you would categorize beginner, intermediate, advanced, but with a beginner weightlifter, what are we looking to do as like this broad brushstroke approach to it?
The broadest stroke for beginners is basically, is specifically you're teaching concept.
Mhm.
The mistakes that beginners make are mistakes of concept, meaning, they don't know really what to do. Like their nervous system doesn't know what to
Right.
do. I
Right.
mean, cognitively, they might understand, hey, I have to do this at this time, but their nervous system is
Mhm.
not mature in a way that they don't have, it hasn't they're they haven't matured enough to have it a habit.
Mhm.
So they're still uh, uh, they're still learning intuitively what they have to do when they have to do it. So all the training is really involved in habit forming.
Mhm.
And you're measuring stress differently than you would with an advanced athlete. So you look at you repetitions is annual, monthly, weekly, and daily are important. And average absolute intensity relative to body weight, specifically in the back squat and the clean and jerk, because those are going to be the things that are most stressful,
Mhm.
right? So you don't want to create so much stress with an athlete neurologically that they can't perform, these fine motor skills. So you have to be mindful of how much stress you're giving them through the back squat and the clean and jerk. Early on, strength in beginners, especially young athletes, is going to be developed through better coordination,
Mhm.
not so much physical change in the muscle cell itself, but just how all these muscle cells coordinate with each other.
Mhm.
It doesn't require tremendous intensity.
Mhm.
So those are kind of some of the higher arching differences between beginners and advanced athletes. And advanced athletes, they know what they're supposed to do. They're consistent over a broad range of intensities up until in the 90s. Then they start making mistakes, and they're not mistakes of concept. They're not mistakes where the nervous system isn't sure of what it's supposed to do. It's just there's a weakness there that needs to be addressed. So the mistakes in advanced athletes are mistakes of weakness, not concept.
Mhm.
So they're just not strong enough to do the thing that you're asking them to do. And that's exciting because then that gives you a focus, right? The focus is very specific. Okay, this is the weakness we need to address, which will improve their performance. Whereas beginners, it's kind of this broad spectrum of, we need to it's an overall concept of what they need to do. So how, kind of the three phases, if you want to kind of categorize it, it's, beginner, very, real beginners at the very early stages are inconsistently inconsistent, right? They make different mistakes, different times. They have no concept. As they develop and their nervous system becomes a little bit more advanced, they become consistently inconsistent. So they have concept on most things, but there's some things they're still struggling with that need to be developed. And then you ask, like, what's the moment in time when a beginner becomes advanced, and that time is when they become consistently consistent, which means that the mistakes that they make are no longer mistakes of concept, they're mistakes of weakness.
Mhm.
So that to me is an advanced athlete.
Mhm.
Most athletes that we deal with, the vast majority will always be intermediate athletes. They'll be, inconsistent. They'll be consistently inconsistent. The very few will cross over to that realm of consistently consistent.
Mhm. Yeah, and I know one of the main drivers of programming for an advanced athlete is the viewing of ratios and how different lifts kind of correlate to the competition movements, where they fall on the spectrum of hyper efficient, and like hypo or less efficient. with a beginner, knowing that you're ultimately developing this degree of efficiency, this degree of balance, but you're starting with somewhat of like a clean slate, I guess. I guess we could start with a general strength block, which is the first block in this kind of macro cycle. How are you deciding, based on kind of the lack of information you would have, or the inconsistency of the usefulness of the information given, techniques a little up and down, consistently inconsistent? How do the ratios play in, or how do you decide which exercises to use and how to kind of prioritize those?
So in a beginner, if the squat is off, like, so if the back squat is low relative to the clean and jerk, or the front squat is low, then, the strength has to be focused on improving the leg strength, the strength block, the general strength block. Because to me, you got to be mindful that you don't beat somebody up with the clean and jerk if they don't have a strength reserve. To me, the strength reserve is the thing that needs to be developed first, in order, or at least enough strength to handle the clean and jerk. So it's, especially like early on, very young athletes. Young doesn't necessarily mean biological age; it could mean training age as well. If you look at the ratio of the exercises that are the percentage of exercises in the total training, the clean and jerk is, compared to an advanced athlete, the clean and jerk is relatively low percentage of the overall training percentage, because for a number of reasons. I think a lot of the energy in the beginning, when you're teaching somebody, regardless if they're young or old, and it's for different reasons, should be spent on the snatch and the jerk. I think the strength, even if somebody's got a big back squat, you get somebody that's that's older, that's got a big back squat, doesn't mean that they can handle a ton of clean and jerk. Clean and jerk is something that you got to do for a long period of time to get strong at it. Just having strong legs isn't the indicator that you can fully engage in the clean and jerk. I think you guys still have to be mindful. The body needs some tempering, and that takes time. There's no shortcut for that. Now, it's nice to have strong legs. It definitely makes it easier, but you have to be, so you either have somebody that's weak or strong, based on their squat numbers. If you're weak, it adds, if your squat is like 120% of your clean and jerk, that's weak, right? So you have to, the strengthening part should be, how do we increase that number? How do we get that number? If somebody comes in at 150% of their clean and jerk, then their weakness isn't their legs necessarily. So, you might not need a specific time to work on improving their squat, but it doesn't mean they're strong enough to take on a ton of clean and jerks. So I think, spending time developing connective tissue strength, being able to squat is different than being able to come out of the bottom of a clean. The force in which, or how it affects the elbow, how is the grip on the bar? It's a lot of, you're torquing those joints in the clean and jerk. So spending some time with getting those repetitions in at a lower intensity, even if you have a big strength reserve in the beginning, I think it's important for development down the road. So now when you're balanced, like you're technically proficient, you've had some, you have some time under your belt, you've trained long enough to create adaptations where, your connective tissue is strong enough. And then, then it's about, if we want to improve the clean and jerk, let's raise the squat. The ratio, the balance of training is equal, or you're not protecting the athlete by holding them back in the clean and jerk.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's about, now how much can we lift in the clean and jerk? It's about a number. It's not about, just reps to develop, connective tissue integrity. It's about, okay, here's the number we need for this team, or here's the number that we need for this to win this meet, and then we're just pushing. Mm-hmm. I don't do that with beginners. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think it helps us kind of start to get into block one, which if you look through it, so we have the basic structure here, and then we obviously have sheet 2, which is the more detailed version of it. But in block one, you see on Monday you have a snatch and a clean supplementary exercise, and then push, press, squat, pull on Tuesday. Wednesday you have powers, jerk. Thursdays press, squat. Friday snatch, supplement, clean and jerk. Saturday push, press, squat. So a lot of this, it looks like you're getting a lot of exposure. For someone who is weaker, how does this change versus someone who is stronger? Is just frequency, or is it like intensity or combination?
Yeah, so this is not for a beginner, like a straight beginner. This is,
okay.
This is a high intermediate,
gotcha,
advanced athlete, because so if somebody, this is an athlete that is generally not as strength is the weakness.
Gotcha.
So if strength wasn't the weakness, then the general strength block probably would be shorter.
Gotcha.
Right. So I wanted now, and this is a major peak. Mm-hmm. So, which is why the competition phase is 4 weeks.
Right.
If it wasn't, it would have been, if it's a minor peak, it would have been 1 or 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. Which would have left more time for two. It would have, if it's 1 or 2 weeks in the competition, then it would have given us a little bit more time for if strength was the weakness, then I would have had a number of 2 shorter strength blocks.
Gotcha.
So even though I have snatch and clean on the same day, on some of these days, it's really a unidirectional approach in a lot of ways. So if you look at Tuesdays and Thursdays are just really strength focused days.
Right.
Right. So we're putting all the energy in those days in developing strength, because that's really the week. And that's the goal of this, in this strength phase, is to actually improve strength. So I like to have days that are just focused on that. So all your energy that day is going into improving the strength, the qualities of strength. Mondays is a snatch focused day. The clean is a supplemental. I mean, it is supplemental to the snatch. So it'll be when any exercise that isn't the full snatch or clean and jerk is a supplemental exercise.
Okay.
So it changes the dynamic of the lift. Usually shortens the range of motion in some way or another. So it doesn't require as much energy. But since this is an athlete that is it's not just a beginner, we need to snatch. If we're going to dedicate days just to strength, you have to have, you have to have a certain level of exposure of the snatch and the clean and jerk. So then then you'll double up. If you look at it, there's times when each day will have a very specific focus.
Mm-hmm.
So I've talked about this in the past. Like for instance, Monday is always going to be a snatch focus day. Tuesday is going to be a jerk focus day. Wednesday is going to be a clean focus day. Thursday, jerk focus day. Friday, snatch focus day. Saturday, clean and jerk focus day. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean you can't do both exercises, both competition lifts on the same day. It's just the primary stress is going to be focused on one of those lifts. Mm-hmm. So that's how I like, for a number of reasons, how I like to organize training. But does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. And I know with like the more advanced athletes, like you said, these would typically be broken up a little bit more. But you obviously still have some sort of focus. So like you said, on Monday, it's more of a snatch focus with the competitive exercise, and then a supplemental clean exercise, and then a strength day, and then powers, which obviously are going to lessen the load, reduce some of the range of motion with the squat.
And then we go heavier in the jerk. Okay. The jerk, although it's really difficult to exercise, metabolically, it's not as, especially when you go from blocks, mm-hmm. It's not as impactful as a snatch or a clean. So, and we tend to jerk heavier more often, especially if we have blocks. If you don't have blocks, then it becomes a little bit of a challenge, because the lowering of the weight is a bitch.
Yeah. And well, that's a good question. So I know with more beginner intermediate athletes, you're looking to preserve the quality of the movement. You're maybe looking to reduce some of the complexity. So instead of a lot of like hang lifts, to develop some of the eccentric strength and develop some of the isometric strength to hold positions, you would go from a block. With the jerk, is it something where you generally would always prefer block jerks over rack jerks, or is there a shift in focus? Like, how do you decide on something like that?
Beginners, I don't want them going for blocks.
Okay.
I mean, because I think that lowering of the jerk, creates tremendous eccentric strength mm-hmm. in the knees. It develops incredible torso strength mm-hmm. and grit. Mm-hmm. I think that so very often with beginners, I don't want them lifting from jerk boxes. Mm-hmm. But once you start to get more advanced, there might be a time and a place for lowering the jerk, but I think that if you're working specifically on the jerk, mm-hmm. If it's programmed as jerk, for more advanced athletes, I think that they have to go for boxes. Mm-hmm. I just think it's prudent to do that.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that makes a lot of sense. And generally, like you mentioned, they're not handling loads in excess of kind of like, or at the limits of their abilities. So lowering something that's like relatively light, mostly constrained by technique, it's going to be a little easier to manage. So this general,
and you look, you're trying to develop. You're not really being very specific with beginners. It's a general development, including some of these courage, traits of being able to to be challenged mentally and physically, and multiple jerks that are heavy really develop character. And I think, but more specific, I think you're not trying to you're not trying to be very, focused on any one thing.
Right.
It's a general development, and I think that's one of the main differences in the character of training is the broadness or the narrowness of the focus between beginners and more advanced athletes.
No, it's a great point. It actually reminds me, I had a session the other day and I was doing like low hang cleans. I think it was like a low hang power clean to a low hang clean. And when you have to kind of stand up out of the clean and pull the bar back down, and you feel your grip kind of change a little bit, and you feel the weight kind of pull you down a little bit, it's easy to get in your head about that and think, oh, like everything's not perfect, maybe something's going to go wrong, it feels heavy. So I think having to just keep the bar in your hands, to keep it on your shoulders, to lower it back down, like those aspects of it do help build, confidence, strength, just the courage to go under something that doesn't feel quite perfect. Even though obviously you want to do it as well as you can. But so I think that's a really useful point and something to consider. So I think we did a decent job of kind of setting up the basic structure of a strength block, which precedes a more specific block. So for someone who's more of an intermediate, how would the blocks be sequenced? Is it any different from, more of an advanced athlete, or is it kind of similar?
Yeah. So beginners, it's more of the traditional setup. Like
Okay.
I like the calendar, month 4 weeks of of general preparation, or and then strength, or however, like the traditional setup of these blocks, and they're mixed focus, right? I think you want to look at repetitions, you want to however your view of the world is on the yearly volume, right? So then you start with a yearly volume, and you figure out where the most important competitions are. And the real beginners will compete maybe 4 or 5 times a year, with a peak, right? So then you probably you're looking at 4 or 5 training cycles, and with basic linear periodization, and I think that all that is great, and I think that will continue to make improvements with beginners, and until they reach at a certain level where I think that kind of programming is not going to work. It just doesn't create any enough stress in anything, right? Because it's very general. I think what we're seeing here is a program that allows us to intensify stress for short periods of time on very specific things in order to create an adaptation. Because if it's a general program that focuses on everything, you're not going to create enough stress to create an adaptation. So, at the end of the day, to become an elite level athlete, you have to snatch, clean, and jerk heavy weights in training. And you have to be able to handle that. And you have to be able to do it without drugs. Right. So, drugs are very beneficial in that they really increase our capacity to train, so we can train more. We at some point, we can't train more. More meaning our volume of training measured as reps times the weight lifted. Right. So we're going to reach, an advanced athlete is going to reach a certain capacity on how much they can act, how much volume they can handle. So once they reach that volume limits, then how do you continue to create adaptation within those limits? And you can't use a general program to solve that problem. Right. You have to look at what's the most salient issue, and let's stress the fuck out of that. create a change, you know, and then let's take that focus to the next logical step and stress the fuck out of that. You know, they're related, right? So you figure out what the steps are. You know, you stress this thing, create an adaptation. The adaptation helps with this next focus. So there's a sequential order, but we're really, you know, we're really trying to focus on of the most important thing at that moment in time. Whereas a beginner, it's not that. It's, you know, it's more general approach because they haven't reached their capacity to train, right? You know, even if they're lifting these amount of reps, it's not that you can't do more because they still have the capacity. But, you know, then there's other constraints. It's like time, right? How much time do they have to train? But even in those constraints, you know, they're still learning. So, you know, the general approach isn't limited by it's limited by how many repetitions you can do because, you know, there's only so many hours in a day, you know, but it's not limited by the amount of work that they're doing.
Right. Yeah. It's one of those things where when you watch someone who is more of a beginner intermediate, I guess it's more of a beginner, someone who's picking up on the lift, you can see, you know, steady improvements throughout a session. They start to look better, they start to plateau, and then you can see a drop off, right? So it's not that they like are physically unable to handle work. It's just that the quality starts to change within a session. Or, you know, you can only snatch for so long before it's like, okay, we've done an hour and a half of snatching, we should probably do something else, or you know, block off our training in a more effective way. So that makes sense. As far as how the structure changes, it looks like it's becoming more of a workout structured with kind of like a snatch focus, a clean supplement, and then some strength work layered on top. And then it's broken up with like lower and then upper, kind of the same structure, snatch, supplement, clean, squat, pull, and then it's back to upper. And is that just a way to shift the focus a little more away from the squat and to give a little more recovery between sessions?
Well, you talking about in the specific phase?
Yeah, in the specific phase.
Yeah, so, you know, in the specific block, you know, where we're looking at improving, generally, we're looking at improving motor qualities other than strength. So the focus is going to be more speed or velocity or, you know, coordination of the competition lifts. So they're prioritized. The strength is subservient right now to the competition lifts. So, you know, if you look at the, you know, the main focus is going to be to maintain the strength levels developed in the first block, right, with enough stimulation. But the primary, like in a bucket of stress, it's going to be primarily filled with, you know, whatever the improvement is. So if you look at in the top, so for here, you know, I'm pushing the lifts from the block because I want to improve velocity.
Right.
So that's my primary focus. So my focus is I need to improve the velocity of the bar from when it passes the knee. That's the motor quality that I'm focusing on. The squat now becomes more volume, right? And the primary strength here is going to to improve, like, you know, force production max is in the pull.
Gotcha.
Because I'm doing heavy pulling, not heavy squatting. I did heavy squatting more in that first general strength block. You know, I'm doing heavy pulling. Now I can do heavy pulling because the lifts, the competition lifts are primarily from the blocks. So I wouldn't do heavy pulling and heavy lifts from the floor. Right. Because although you can beat the legs up and still perform the snatch, clean, and jerk, you can't beat the back up and do heavy snatch, clean jerk from the floor. It's not wise, because you can perform with with tired legs. It's hard to keep the quality up when the back is fatigued. So that's how I look at this specific block. And in the beginning of the block, I determined what the focus was going to be, right? So I said, okay, we're going to push the velocity, we're going to keep the squatting volume high, we're going to push heavy, we're going to strengthen the back. And then underneath that, like I put, for the, I said, what's the, the makeup of the training? It's going to be unidirectional, which means, each day is going to have a very specific focus. And, then I determined what are those days going to look like. So power and full on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Tuesday, Thursday is going to be jerk focus. Saturday, snatch, we're going to snatch clean jerk. I did that all before I made put any of the numbers in. So then when I sit down to create the numbers, I understand what the focus of the training is and what the structure of the training is, and then I can work. So that's the process of putting this kind of training together.
Yeah, and I know for everyone watching, I know it feels like we might be missing out on a lot of the details, but what we're doing is we're going through the macro cycle as a whole, kind of getting the rationale, getting the some of the more pertinent pieces of information, and then we're going to switch to the sheet with the actual like reps and sets, so we can talk about like how this plays out. So again, this is just setting the scene. Like Sean said, you're kind of creating the purpose, you're filling in the framework, and then you're filling in the details. So it's kind of the way we're approaching it. So and obviously people can see here how that's broken up, the exercises used, the way it's structured throughout the week. And then Sean, as you move on, instead of just going straight into a competition block, you have a transition. Maybe you can go on a little bit about what the purpose of that transition is and what that might look like in terms of the weekly structure.
Yeah, it depends on the athlete. So I'm very careful about deloading. I think that's especially for higher level athletes, you got to be careful because they lose fitness really quickly. So oftentimes, we'll get PRs in these transitions. Like there's in a transition or deload, however you want to call it. I think that you have to be careful about what things you reduce. So you can't reduce everything. You can't. So you have frequency, you have intensity, and you have volume. Right? Those are the three major, major components of a training cycle that cause the most stress in a good way. So in a transition or a deload, you have to be mindful based on how your athlete responds about which one of those things that you decrease. So for me, I like if you're going to reduce frequency, but you don't reduce intensity.
Right.
Volume will take care of itself, because if you reduce frequency, there'll be a reduction in volume, but not a reduction in intensity. I think you got to be very careful about reducing intensity with advanced athletes, especially at if you're transitioning into a competition phase when everything's going to be heavy. The last thing you want to do is reduce intensity.
Right.
So to me, it makes sense in that, like for this block, I didn't put what that block looks like on the next page. I just gave 1 week example, but that transition phase was a reduction in frequency.
Gotcha.
But the intensity was still up. We pushed things. We just gave the body a chance to recover through just not as frequent training, because this athlete was training 6 days a week. So it probably, if I remember correctly, reduced it to 3 or 4 for that transition week.
Now, when you do something like that, are you taking out, so if we look, so say we're just using this specific block as an example, are you taking out, say, like a Thursday and a Tuesday to go Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, or are you taking out like a Thursday and a Friday? Are you still keeping, you know, the volume more kind of, are you breaking it up more, or are you keeping it like front loading and then back loading? Like, how would you take out days to make sure it kind of fits the recovery bucket that you want it to fit?
So if we continue to have intensity, then depending upon what Saturday looked like on the previous week, so if it was a real heavy day, then I start looking. So during this transition, like the transition before the competition and during the competition, the timing between the heaviest loads becomes really important. So that 72-hour window becomes an important thing. So what I mean by that is that if that Saturday previous to the transition was heavy, then the next highest intensity day would be 72 hours after that. And then, so during that transition, we would have 2 days of high intensity separated by 72 hours.
Gotcha.
And then leading into the competition where it's the heaviest training days are separated by 72 hours. Give me 1 second. I gotta let Ella out.
Yeah, sure.
She sleeps late, so hold on 1 second. All right, guys, I'm back. Sorry about that.
Oh yeah, no worries.
Ella's, for those of you who don't, Ella's my 12-year-old bulldog.
I'll make sure I throw up a picture in the video so people can see what she looks like. Okay, awesome. So I think we kind of actually went through the transition pretty well. You're just saying, okay, where's the intensity going to be? We're going to remove some of the work that's going to allow for more recovery between those highly intense sessions. Then we get the switch to the actual competition block itself, which will lead us into the peak and make us the best on the day at snatching and clean and jerking. So maybe you can just talk about the structure of that and a bit of the rationale.
So if you notice, like I have days, so I don't worry about so I get off the calendar. I don't worry about like Monday through Friday anymore. So what I look at is what's the day. So I have one, 2, 3, and 4 week peaking, you know, but it's in days. So this is, this is 27 days. And I look at, so, and for each of these time periods, I have very specific, what it looks like is pretty much this. So for this 27 days, I work backwards from the competition, right? So, I know that the last, for me, like generally speaking, this is a general process. It's gonna vary for different people, but generally speaking, about 6 or 7 days before the competition is going to be the last super stressful day, right? So then from that point, I look at every 72 hours before that as another stressful event.
Gotcha.
So if you look at what this looks like, so day one through 6, is that first week. So that first day, it's a max in either the hang or the block, then heavy pulls. Day 6, right? So it's it's a little bit, so day it's a little bit more than 72 hours, but day 6 match doubles. Snatch, clean, and jerk. Then day 10, measuring, just because we're looking at recovery, right? So day 10, they're going to be recovered. Max Powers, heavy pulls. Right, day 13, 95%. I think probably, I don't know if it's both lifts or I forget. So you see, like, then day 17 is another stressful event.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so that's how I look at the preparation leading up to competition, is measuring those stressful days.
Mm-hmm.
And making sure that, so we don't, like, in training, when we're trying to create an adaptation, we want to overlay the stress,
Mm-hmm.
right? We don't want we don't want full recovery,
mm-hmm.
right? So we want, it's okay for the stress is going to bleed
Mm-hmm.
on top of each other, but the focus is different. Mm-hmm. Right? So if the stress on Monday is a snatch stress with high intensity, we have a high, we can still have a high intensity the next day on the jerk. It's not like, from an overall perspective, we're still overlaying the stress. We're not letting the athlete recover. We want to create stress. We want to create that adaptation. But as we get to the competition, we have to, that stress bucket, we don't want it to, fill up. We want to still maintain the qualities of strength and speed, but we don't want the overall stress to be high. Mm-hmm. So timing of those stressful loads is a way to maintain the strength and speed, but decrease the overall stress to the athlete. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the overall concept for that.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I kind of use an explanation to get this across to people, because sometimes people will take random days off and they're like, well, or random weeks off, and they're like, well, I wonder why, like, my training didn't go well. And it's one of those things where, like, rest is useful insofar as it allows you to come back to perform at a certain level. And then once you take too much time off, it messes with the coordination, messes with kind of the feel. It changes things enough. It's otherwise you would just take months off between sessions and you'd be the most recovered you'd ever be, and the most able to perform. But we're trying to balance a lot of other aspects that are kind of even like unknowable to some extent. It's like, why, if I take too long between clean and jerks, do I just lose something? Given I have the same amount of muscle, the same level of force production, there's like a coordination thing that's really hard to pin down, that it like makes timing very, very, very critical. The one thing I did want to touch on, you just kind of, before we move on to that example week to talk through this, I noticed during the general strength block, you have kind of a list of exercises. Maybe you can discuss those, and then we can talk about how that will change from block to block, like the utility of that stuff.
Yeah. So, I look at, where at the beginning of the strength block, I look at, what are the things that I want to focus on? Like, what are the problems that I want to solve? So, for me, for this athlete, it was a lot of upper body, upper back, being able to hold position off the floor, and lat strength, all that stuff. So, I was looking at exercises that I can use to improve, upper body strength. Mm-hmm. And more specifically, lat and up and lat and tricep and over. So I kind of go through my exercise. I like to use some novel exercises. So a bunch of these are novel exercises that the athlete hadn't done before. Mm-hmm. I think it's okay to use the same exercises for a period of time, but I think it's also novelty with supplemental exercise. I think is important. Mm-hmm. As long as it's addressing the issue. Right. I think for another reason, it keeps it interesting. Mm-hmm. Right. I think that a novel exercise is going to require the athlete is not going to be able to do as much weight. Mm-hmm. but you still get a good you get a good training effect, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's novel,
Mm-hmm.
without beating the athlete up with intensity.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's an important, because look, with the supplemental exercise are really important and they're a big part of what we do, but you don't want it to be so stressful that it decreases the effectiveness of the most important exercises. So novelty allows lower intensity with still getting a good training effect.
Right. And I think one point that Sean made that I want to reiterate to people listening, and if they're interested in reading more about this, there's a really good paper. And I think Kyle Travis is one of the lead authors, but basically it's on regional hypertrophy. So how muscles grow in size, given kind of like the stress that's placed on them. And generally with different exercises, you might see, or different ranges of motion, you'll see different, areas of the muscle grow differently depending on the stress. So if you have a variety of exercises, not only do you get the coordination benefits, the novelty, the fun aspect of it, but the muscle will grow differently. So I guess you could think of this almost like if you do a curl where you turn your hand in at the top, that might grow the bicep differently than if you have your hand turned at the bottom, right? So that act of kind of like pronating or supinating or changing the angle, that's going to change the way the muscle grows. And if you can grow the muscle more fully, you get like a better kind of summation of force into the movement, given that like the lifts are just summations, a summation of force from different muscles that contribute to it. So just kind of bringing that up because it's a really cool paper. Sean made a really great point. So just trying to explain a little bit of my thoughts on that. And then if you go into the specific block, Sean, how would all of that stuff change? So if we're going into something more specific to the lifts, focusing more on velocity, less on kind of like maximal squat strength, how would the selection of supplementary exercises like that change?
So again, we have a finite capacity to manage stress, right? As organisms. So if the majority of our stress is going into the snatch and the clean and jerk, then obviously the volume of exercises that are not snatch and clean and jerk has to be reduced.
Right.
So, instead of taking like a penicillin approach, like a broad spectrum of exercises that even we use in the general, we would say, what are the exercises that are going to have the biggest effect on the parts that are weakest?
Gotcha. Yep.
So like for the back, like a rowing exercises, barbell, dumbbell rowing, right? Pull-ups, push-ups, things like that. And I also, I'll also add like traditional bodybuilding exercises that don't take up a lot of energy, like curls and tricep extensions and dips and push-ups. We always do those things. We always do those things. If they're not going to beat you up. They keep the muscle strong. They keep the blood flowing. They keep, I love those body weight type exercises, traditional bodybuilding exercises. So I think, you just have to, I don't count the volume of those exercises into the overall count. So, but I also use them sometimes as conditioning. So I'll put a circuit at the end of a training day. Body weight squat, push up, pull up, curls, tricep extensions. 10 of each minute, like just go through them. So as a way to, just to try to find ways of conditioning. Also do during the specific phase, I'll do prowler work. 10 minutes of pushing, of dragging a sled. Things like that are going to help recovery, help conditioning, But the volume of that supplemental work is a lot less. It's more targeted on specific issues.
Gotcha. I mean, that was a great answer. That was actually useful for me to hear, taking kind of the more broad approach, kind of nuking the whole, country. I don't know if that's kind of an inappropriate explanation versus like very targeted dropping of missiles to hit the more critical points. And then as you get into the competition period, how much of that remains, if at all, given the demands kind of the maximal attempts and variations and then lifts from the floor?
Yeah, so I think, we keep a lot of the small joint bodybuilding because I think it helps with recovery. So like curls and dips and tricep extensions and, shoulder, like band shoulder stuff, keep all of that stuff in there, until the very end. You don't get rid of it because they're in good shape by this point. Like, they're not gonna, that's not gonna, if that's fatiguing them, then you didn't do your job 12 weeks ago.
Right.
So, and as far as the other stuff, like, pressing obviously will be in there. You gotta be mindful of back work, like extra back work, because, they're getting a lot of, their back's getting a lot of work. So, but, I like to keep the small joint stuff in there the whole time, especially with women. Right. I think it's really good for them. I'm trying to look at what the program, what I included to give you an idea. So like during the competition phase, not every, like, so those stressful days are stressful days, right? So then, for instance, on day 2 of the competition block, I had a circuit, suitcase deadlifts, incline dumbbell press, gorilla row, dips, reverse curl, hanging leg raise.
Oh, wow.
That was on the day after. That was day 2. So we did, I had a bunch of those circuits in there up until day 10.
Gotcha.
So let me see, day 10. No, actually, no, I take that back. Day 17, we were still doing it.
Okay.
And then even on day, so we would do it like, but just to be clear, this is an athlete that is in really good shape. Body fat is good, conditioning is good because we time rest, especially in the competition, we time rest throughout. So by the time this extra work is not fatiguing. It enhances. So this, so you can't just say, oh, we're going to do all the, it takes time to develop that kind of capacity.
Right.
It doesn't happen in one training cycle.
Right.
So just I don't want everybody to say, oh, we're going to do bodybuilding to the day off, and then all of a sudden you have to shit's bed. I'm warning you that this is a buildup of, remember this. So this 13 weeks that you have here is the most important meet of the year.
Right.
So it looks different than in the beginning of the year.
Right.
So we got to this point because of the work we did 50 weeks before this.
Right.
So just something to keep in mind.
Of course. There's always, more to the story. So we'll kick over to sheet 2, which is, so this is an actual week of
this is the first week. Yeah, this is week 1.
Okay. So maybe you can kind of talk us through just the general kind of structure of it. And again, this is something we went through at the start of this video. We talked about the strength block, or the most like general prep block. But then here it is kind of written out, sets and reps, exercises, and then how the bodybuilding kind of plays into it. So maybe, yeah, maybe we can just talk through it. So like Monday.
One of the differences between, beginning athletes and, advanced, or, getting to advanced, is I don't prescribe specific intensities.
Gotcha.
With more advanced athletes. What I'll do is I'll prescribe ranges.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't hold on, let me see if I can include that. Give me a second.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so if you see, I look at I program these zones.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll give a certain rep, like 2 sets of 3,
Right.
and and I'll give a range, whether it's light to medium,
Mm-hmm.
and it gives, and that's where all the work sets are. So it doesn't
Gotcha.
mean start there. Like they'll do a lot of reps and sets between 50 and 60%.
Mm-hmm.
To kind of get rhythm, and especially in the snatch, if we're starting with the snatch, and depending upon how they feel, right? So this is something. This is a remote athlete, right? Fairly high level remote athlete. So depending upon how they feel, and they understand what that means, like they can feel bad, but if they're performing well, it doesn't matter. One of my good friends, John Bros, he said this one thing years ago, and it resonated with me. He says, how you feel is a lie.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that. I do, because the only thing that matters is the quality of the performance.
Right.
So if you're performing well and you feel like shit, I don't give a fuck how you feel.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, and my athletes at this level know that. So they have the flexibility, because I'm not there watching them all the time, right? Like I'm not watching them. I'm not there. They're not in front of me. So if they were in front of me, I know that on a particular day, here's where the range is where I want them to compete at, to lift at. And
Right.
I'll make those adjustments. I'll tell them, go up, go down.
Mm-hmm.
So, they have to take, some ownership in this, and they know that on this day we're looking, here's the range that I want you to be in. If you feel good, take it up to the top of that range, but don't go beyond that. And if you're feeling like crap, let's take it down. Here's the lower part of the range. So that's how I look at so like this with the snatch,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the weight that was performed was 61 kilos. So
right.
We were in the medium range.
Right. Gotcha.
So 61 is reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how. Now with a beginner athlete, I would, it would look different. Like it would be, I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
Sorry. So for a beginner, we'd have some very specific, right? So we have
gotcha.
60%. So here, right, 60%, 3 plus 3, 3 sets.
Mm-hmm.
For the power snatch with overhead squat, clean and jerk, you'll do 60%, 3 reps, 70%, 3 plus 3, 4. So like it'd be very specific, and we would base the 100% off of something, right? It's either competition max, or generally for me, I like training max, because it's more because you're training,
right?
Right. So it would be some number that they would take their percentages off of, and it would be very specific. It doesn't mean that, there's not room for, but I don't need them. They don't know enough to make those decisions.
Right. Right.
So that's one of the main differences between beginners and, and advanced as far as the presentation of the programming.
Well, that's interesting. So some people might be thinking, well, with beginners, when I guess this is like different based on their movement competency. So with beginners, they might be a little more inconsistent, a little more erratic. So the weight should be a little more flexible. But we're talking about like beginners who have a somewhat established technique. You know what you're doing.
That's a good point. So with the very beginners, there's no intensity.
Gotcha.
Because you don't know, because it's 3 sets of 2, same as the advanced. But what you're looking for is you're trying to find whatever and it's going to be in flux, especially with young athletes, right? Like their bodies, when you're before the age of around 25, your neuroplasticity is just incredible.
Right.
So you're constantly adapting to the stresses that are put upon you. So, what you can come from day to day, it can be different. Right. So what you're looking for is the weight in beginners is really just a tool to develop enough proprioception to be able to, you want to try to find, the heaviest weight that they can do, that allows them to feel what they're supposed to do.
Right.
Not so light that they're just, that they're not experiencing any external resistance, but enough external resistance that allows them to feel what you want them to feel.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's really going to be variable, the weight on the bar, until you establish until they you put them in their first competition experience, whether it's a controlled competition in the gym or, then you can establish, okay, well, here's kind of where they're going to be, here's kind of what they're able to do. And then the next training block from that would be percentage based.
Gotcha.
And then as they become advanced, I kind of get away from the percentages and I kind of go back to this, but we have an idea of like what, these zones are based on a percentage.
Right.
So it's all, but it's just it's almost like we go back to the beginning, right? We go back to what's the most weight you can lift, technically proficient. So we kind of revert back to what we did in the beginning.
Yeah, that makes sense. Kind of preserving the quality, and then I guess the quality and the speed are good indicators of how the training plan is playing out.
The only indicator that matters.
Right.
How you perform within, whatever your concept is of what good technique should be. No matter what the training says, the numbers on the page, the only thing that can't vary is the quality of the movement. Gotcha. You can change everything else. Reps, sets, volume, intensity, all of that shit can change. What can't change is the quality of the movement. Because that's what we're trying to create with these numbers. We're not just putting numbers on a page because we've got nothing else to do. We put numbers on a page to create these movements in a very specific way. And to me, look, if an athlete competes 3 times a year, that's 18 chances to perform. If you're doing 10,000 reps in a year, right? So you're doing 10,000 reps to do 18 that count. So the quality of those 10,000 reps is going to indicate the quality of the performance of those 18.
Right.
So if you're a total shit show for those 10,000 reps, how do you expect to have any consistency in those 18?
Right.
right? So the consistency of the 18 is relying upon the quality of the 10,000. And I'm not using 10,000 because that's the, the habit. I think that's all bullshit.
Right.
I was just doing a program for beginners, and 10,000 was the amount of yearly repetition.
Gotcha.
So I don't buy into, you got to do 10,000 repetitions. That's bullshit. But so if the point is you can't, you can alter everything, but you can't alter the quality.
Gotcha. So the kind of the overarching idea is, reframing it as good training puts weight on the bar, but the quality should be kind of static from week to week. Like the quality should always be maintained. The weight on the bar changes because it's stressful enough, but not overly stressful or under stressful, to where it just puts itself, in this position to go heavier and heavier and heavier, because the physical state of the athlete keeps improving. But it's not sacrificing the quality to put more weight on the bar so that the quality can improve.
No, I mean, there's no, missing a weight 10 times and making it on the 11th doesn't help.
I think it would hurt, if anything, because then you're like, oh, well, then next time if I miss it, I might be able to make it. So I'll just keep going until it sticks.
Yeah, it's not like, I've heard coaches talk about, it builds courage, it builds determination. Look, there's other ways of doing that.
Right.
Without sacrificing the quality of the movement, and I'm not a fan of that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, there's been coaches that have been successful with that method. And it's not the methodology that I prescribe to. Doesn't mean it's wrong. That's not my view of the world. That's all. I mean, I'm not, and some of my good friends are like that.
Right.
So I'm not pissing on that process. I'm just saying it's not the way I like to do it.
Right. Okay. So kind of coming back to this training week. So we talked through it kind of broadly. Here it is on paper. So if people are watching, they can kind of get a feel for what this exactly looks like. What's entirely irrelevant, I think, just pointing out the way it's structured. So saying like, okay, this is more of a snatch focused day on day one. You can see it's got a decent amount of training volume. And then it's got a power clean from a block above the knee plus a tempo front squat. And then very, very little bodybuilding. You come in on day 2 and it's got push press back squat, more of the strength focused day, decent amount of training volume. And then you have a substantial amount of bodybuilding compared to day 1. So you're seeing the shift in focus going from more the competitive movements to more of the strength / kind of like strength and hypertrophy movements, more muscle focused, less movement focused. Come in on day 3, it shifts the focus to more of the power variations, with the snatch being blocks above the knee, and then kind of a similar pattern. And then Sean, you mentioned clean and jerks being a little less frequent, and you have power clean and jerk along with a power snatch from a block above the knee. How often earlier on are you seeing like heavier clean and jerks, or at least like full cleans? Is it like once or twice a week? Is it kind of just dependent on the person?
It depends. Generally, the end of the week is going to be full clean and jerk.
Gotcha. Yep.
I like that because there's, I've already have some fatigue, because at competition, you're not clean and jerking fresh.
Right. Yep.
Your nervous system could be a little compromised and still be able to clean and jerk. Snatch front loaded in the beginning of the week.
Right.
So like Monday, Friday we snatch too. But generally speaking, in the unidirectional training process, the snatches would be Monday and Friday.
Mm-hmm.
As a primary focus. Clean and jerk on the last day of so in this block, Friday we're doing it, and Saturday was a strength day because I needed I needed 3 strength days.
Right. Right.
So it just that the structure of it was such that Saturday needed to be that strength day because I didn't want to start. I don't want to start the week with a strength day because that would compromise the snatch for the next day.
Right.
So I wanted the nervous system fresh for the snatch, and this is the process that I work. So if that's the case, if I know Monday's we want to snatch on Monday, and I wanted to do 3 strength days, then I had to fit it. And I prefer not to have 2 strength days in a row.
Right.
The solution to that problem is Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday for strength days, because that's my, that's my primary focus is the strength, but I still have to maintain the integrity of the snatch.
Right.
So those are the 2 variables that I had to fit together. So that's why this training structure looks like the way it does, because those were the 2 variables that I needed to fit in together.
Okay. And that all makes sense. I think, again, it's a great example of how you would kind of put this to practice, so to speak. And then there's a box where you have end of the training period summary. And I think this is useful to kind of talk over as we wrap up, because
before you go there, if you go to the very end, so you'll see for that week,
right? Yeah.
So this is where one of the other differences are between beginners and advanced is so with a beginner program, I've mapped out basically all the work is mapped out, and then it's distributed, through whatever the training program is, 12-week training program. With this, we're measuring stress reactively.
Right.
Because we're giving ranges.
Right.
So I know that I've established, so if you look at total volume for this athlete, total volume, like the upper limit of the total volume for any given day is around 24,000. So like I have to be mindful, like, so when we reach that point, then I know that I have to pay attention.
Right.
I do know what the volume distribution is going to be, because the reps and sets don't change.
Right.
But the amount of work, the amount of volume is going to change from week to week. Now I have an idea of where that's going to be, because we're in a specific range. But so there's a reactivity component to the amount of work in this style of training that you have to be mindful of, that doesn't exist when you give very specific intensities that an athlete should work at.
Right.
So it becomes a bit of a challenge. So like I'll know, where but these are the things that I measure. Right. So reps, the distribution of reps, the volume for each exercise, the distribution of the volume, the average relative intensity per exercise, and then the average weight lifted. I like to look at that because I can compare that to their body weight.
Gotcha.
And then the overall average relative intensity of all the exercises that I assign a percentage to.
Gotcha. So the one thing that sticks out to me, and I'm sure that people who are looking at this and have seen a lot of programs, the one thing that sticks out is somewhat unique, is that you track the push press kind of as an individual lift. You maybe just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, for this athlete, I do, because and I also do it with clean pull, with all the pulls.
Right.
And deadlifts are their own.
Oh, gotcha.
Because, I like heavy deadlifting. I like heavy pulling, over 100%. of the snatch or the clean, and it was fucking up my calculations because
Right.
it's not a real, like, so I've cleaved off all the heavy pulling. And the push press, yeah, because I just find that I think I did it with just this athlete.
Gotcha. Okay.
But the pulling, not the extensions. Like, so extensions, are generally going to be lighter, right? 80, 90%. So I include those under the snatch and clean, but the pulls are always doing over 100%.
Right.
So those have their own category. So it doesn't, so with the relative, so what was fucking up was the relative intensity, the average relative intensity.
Right.
I was getting these crazy average relative intensity numbers because, we're doing 130%, pulls.
Right.
So I was like, no, I gotta beat that.
Right.
So, but like, it's a good point. Like, however, this makes sense to me. But like, the most important thing, like the big takeaway for coaches on this is have a process.
Right.
And stick to it. And then you can adjust it. Like however you have, whatever organization makes sense to you of how you organize, these variables. It doesn't have to be this, but you have to have something. So then you can look back on it and say, okay, well, this worked, this didn't, we're going to change this. That's what I did with the pulls, right? I did it one way and it wasn't making sense, so I changed it. So, but you have to find something that works for you. And it doesn't have, I'm crazy, so it doesn't have to be this involved. But it's got to be something, and that's going to help you determine like if your process is working or not. Because if you don't have a process, then it's just like, you're shooting in the air. Hopefully you'll hit something.
Well, and I think to that point, it's important to have a process that's like tangible, that exists outside of your mind or just you as an individual, because again, we're making these videos so people can see it and get a glimpse into how Sean, or how you program and how you prepare an athlete. We could only do that if you make it explicit. We can only do that if you write it down and if you talk us through it and you show us. But if it's left up to kind of like intuition, or I just felt this way, that's useful insofar as it helps the athlete, but it doesn't help the coaches who want to know why. So I think having this like written out is really useful.
Well, and for the coach, doesn't help the coach because you can't repeat what you did. Right. So part of measuring is is the tool that you're using to measure, is it repeatable? Right. Is it valid? Is it repeatable? Right. So, having a process allows you to, to fill that repeatable, check that box. Right. Well, all programming is guessing. Yep. It's just with a process, you can make better guesses because we're dealing with, biological organisms that have, our stimuli can change based on, their external environment, which is always changing. We have no control over the external environment. So, based on that, it's always going to be variable. But like for this, like collecting data, especially over longitudinal, like, so for like a more advanced athlete, you need like a year of doing this. And then you can look back and say, well, and then you can start to make some better guesses.
Well, there's nothing worse than, people would say, well, there's nothing worse than having a failure and not knowing why it failed. I would say having a success and not knowing why you have a success, because then it's harder to go back to the well and say, well, we know this is why it worked. Let's put that in our toolbox. But if you're like, okay, something happened, the stars aligned, I don't know what it is.
That's a problem.
Yeah, that's a problem.
That's a problem. So like, the big takeaway, especially for beginning coaches, is, have a method. Right. I've developed a methodology for teaching technique, the Waxman's method. It's been very successful over, and it's the same way. It doesn't mean I don't change things. I'm making making a change to it as we speak. I'm adding some things and taking something out, but the programming is the same way. I mean, programming is all programming is it's it's an exercise in stress management. Right. So, how you organize that stress and how you quantify it is your process.
Right.
So you have to develop a process surrounding that. And it doesn't have to look like anything that like anybody else is doing. I mean, it can, but that's the most important part of one of the most important part of program design is that concept.
Yeah, so I think that's a fantastic place to kind of wrap up. I think we pretty thoroughly covered, how you essentially approach developing or planning and programming for more of an intermediate level athlete. This contrasted to what we did with the advanced video. You mentioned, your method for teaching technique. I know we talked about you having some videos that you possibly wanted to make a little more formal and released. Where are we at with all that stuff in case people are interested?
I'm reorganizing everything, my YouTube channel, and I'm reshooting. I'm going to be reshooting videos. So I don't have, if you go onto the website, Waxman's Gym YouTube, all those videos should be there, at least the older ones.
Right.
But, I'm putting it all into a book. I'm writing a book now. It's not actually a weightlifting book, but it's more of a, I hate to use the word mindset, but it's a book on basically being a better human.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And then the next book is going to be a weightlifting book on, basically it's going to be on processes on teaching technique and processes on learning programming. And a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, but just here's a guide,
right,
on each technique and how to program. So that's the next book, but all that'll be in time. I'm going to be reshooting those videos this year for sure, this first half of the year. And then again, I'm doing a new website that's going to launch in a few weeks, but it's just a stopgap between that. I got another one that's going to be coming. This is the one, because right now my waxmangym.com is like, is from when I was in LA.
Right.
We got pandemic services on there and all kind of stuff. So I'm doing one now that's just more updated, but I'm working with another guy, and we're going to do an actual, the one that's going to be the one that I'm going to have for a long time. So yeah, it's all in the middle of flux, but you can get my programming on Train Heroic right now, or if you want to train, you want custom programming, I'm reopening that. So I did it before. I got a bunch of people, and I stopped because I didn't want to do too many at once. So I wanted to figure out, if I can manage what I can manage. So I'm about to take on probably 5 more custom remote, and that's not on Train Heroic. That's, you and me, we're on Coaches Now, and we're talking, and we're very specific. So I'm taking 5 more on for that. I got 3 teams up on Train Heroic that you can choose from right now, and that's it's low cost. It's I'm involved with it every day. I'm on the message boards and all that stuff. So I'm in Salt Lake. So if you're So Debbie Millett and I runs Praxis. She's kind of the head coach of Utah. You know, so anybody that comes or contacts me or contacts her, you know, we kind of talk about it. But she's the head of weightlifting in Utah. And because I'm not looking at developing the same giant gym I did in LA. I don't want to do that. But so I'm taking on a few people here and there, mostly men. She takes the women for the most part. Yeah, so that's what I got going on.
Yeah. So for everyone who's listening and they really want, you really want to work with Sean, no excuses now. Obviously just reach out. You can catch him on Instagram, Facebook, email, stuff like that. For everyone who liked this, you can share it with your friends. You can give us a thumbs up, leave a comment down below. You can go follow me on all my social media platforms. If you want to buy stuff, you'll probably figure out where to go. Yeah, Sean, once again, thanks for doing this for everyone. I know it's a valuable kind of a resource. And again, for everyone listening, you can support both of us so we can make more content. And we'll catch you on the next video. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, guys.